As people come in, just want to say a welcome. Um, if you are comfortable, we would love to know, maybe introduce yourself in the chat, sort of who you are and where you're from. If you have a particular interest in this topic, we would love to hear that. And we'll wait a few minutes for people to join and then I'll get us started. Perfect. Thanks, Annette. So you'll see in the chat again, I invite you to join. And then please, if you are joining, make sure you're muted. That would be great. And we will have an opportunity for dialogue at the end. And I'm just going to wait. Is Michelle here?
Not
Not
yet.
yet. Okay. I said one of the fun things about these speaker series is we have people joining from all over Canada and internationally. So it's always interesting to hear where people are from and their interest in the area. So again, I would invite you just to put a hello message in the chat to let us know where you're from. My name is Sandra, by the way. I am on faculty at McMaster University and part of the Equity-Based Co-Creation Center, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. Oh, hi, Eve Marie. What time is it for you in Sweden right now? We try to plan the sessions to have people be able to join at a reasonable time from different places, so that's great. I'm going to get us started. We start with first of all, a welcome, but also a couple of logistical housekeeping notes. So we are going to record this session so that we can post it afterwards on our website. And just in doing that, just want to let people know that your cameras are optional, but encouraged, particularly during the interactive Q&A piece. If you are not comfortable being identified on camera with the recording of the session, you can change you can rename, you can be anonymous. And again, you can do that by going to your Zoom options. I think it's under participants that you can rename yourself as needed. Um, want to say that really we try to create um, safe but brave spaces for a dialogue, and we really encourage people to use the chat. Um, and we will also have opportunity for verbal Q&A. And we will turn on your mics during the small or large group sessions. And please hold your questions until after the presentation, but you can put them in the chat at any time, and we will monitor that and bring those forward as needed. I think next, and this is our agenda for today. So I have a few welcome remarks, and then we're going to have the presentation. There will be some time for interactive workshop and discussion at the end. I think next slide, Sanat. Um, When we do this work, we talk about starting with a comfort agreement. Again, I said we try to create safe but brave spaces for discussion and dialogue, and a couple of sort of ground rules. We're now in the world of AI. We are recording this session, but we kindly ask that you don't use personal AI tools. If you want a transcript, we're happy to have them available afterwards. We do have closed captioning turned on in this session. So in your Zoom bar, you can see show captions and you can use that as needed. Also, some of these topics are not easy to talk about. And again, we would just encourage you to take care of yourself in these sessions. If you need to go get a coffee or take a break at any time, that's perfectly fine. And just welcome you to settle in and enjoy the dialogue, but certainly to take care of yourself. And as I said before, respectful engagement. We don't always have to agree. Um, but again, the idea here is for dialogue and discussion. And I think Sinette will be monitoring and mute you if you accidentally unmute yourself, just to make sure that we have a safe space for all. And also want to spend a little bit of time acknowledging the land that we are on. I know that many of you are from other places. And again, we can invite you to say where you're from, but at McMaster, we recognize and that we're located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And just a reminder to acknowledge that we are stewards of this land and we are called to truth and reconciliation at a personal level. And certainly, I know that it's been a learning and unlearning journey for me to understand what that means in the context of my personal and professional life. I am really delighted and excited about this session today. We have a team of five speakers today, and I'm going to do yeah, and I'm going to do a quick introduction of them here and read their bios. So first of all, Dr. Serena Eisenberg is the chair in Mixed Methods Palliative Care Research at the Briere Health Research Institute. She's an associate professor in the Department of Medicine and School of Epidemiology and Public Health at the University of Ottawa. Her mixed methods research focuses on ensuring that all people, regardless of background or health condition, receive the highest possible quality of palliative care. Next, we have Rebecca McGuire-Sneakus, who's a research associate with the Eisenberg Lab at the Briere Health Research Institute, where her work focuses on applying arts and design-based research to public to research feedback loop methods in palliative care, supporting interdisciplinary knowledge mobilization and co-creating equity-focused interventions with patients, families, and clinicians. Next, we have Nyana Flynn, who's a primary caregiver and was frontline in helping her husband coordinate his end-of-life care with as much dignity as possible while maintaining his right to choose. She was able to witness what worked for him within the health system and where the system was lacking. This experience was repeated as her father's dementia worsened to the point that he was no longer able to live independently. It was only when he was unable to advocate for himself and in crisis that the system mobilized to advance his care. The subject of death and dying is a difficult one, but as an artist and caregiver, and as a person with lived experience, Nyana strives to ultimately help others in their own journeys. Using knowledge gained through lived experience, Nyana ensures that the research team applies a patient-oriented approach, centers patients and caregiver perspectives, and orients projects towards patient-oriented outcomes. Welcome, Nyana. And Kyle Droulard is a research coordinator at the Eisenberg Lab at the Briere Research Institute. Their research interests include inclusive and equitable palliative care and the intersections between palliative care and sexuality. They've supported arts-based research on storytelling in palliative care unit and translating the research on a good death to public audiences through art. And last but not least, Aria Wills is a health services research coordinator in the Eisenberg Lab at the Briere Health Research Institute, supporting mixed methods research and arts-based knowledge translation for end-of-life care. She is also a master's candidate in epidemiology at the University of Ottawa. Aria is passionate about understanding and improving the quality of life and care for marginalized and underserved populations and bringing research to life through participatory art and design that resonates, engages, and empowers. So I would invite them to share their slides to talk about Paywalls to Community Halls, Democratizing Health Research Through Art. Over to you.
Apologies, I forgot to share the sound, so give me one moment. Thank you so much, Sandra and Sinat, for the invitation to give this talk. I was introduced to the Equity-Based Co-Creation Center a couple of years ago and have been collaborating and involved with their work ever since. And it's been really a fantastic collaboration. And I've learned so much from the incredible team that is just continuing to grow and flourish as this work becomes more and more prevalent in research across sectors. So today we're going to be talking about From Paywalls to Community Halls, Democratizing Health Research Through Art. We have a packed agenda for you today, and we want to make sure we get to the interactive session at the end. Nyana is going to open this presentation by sharing some of her lived experience regarding being a caregiver to her husband as he navigated end of life. And then we'll go into kind of the background and theory behind the work that we do in arts-based knowledge translation within our lab. Kyle and Rebecca will share two examples of projects in the past 2 years that we've done related to the use of our arts-based knowledge translation method. And then we'll go back to Nyana to share how she's been engaged in our work and the benefits of involving patients and caregivers in this type of work. We'll then go on to having a bit of sharing of lessons learned and practical considerations for those of you who are hoping to do this type of work in your either professional or personal lives. And then we'll go back to presenting another project called the Terminal Diner. And from there, we'll use that as a launching pad to go into our interactive session. So really excited to discuss all of this with you today. I just wanted to mention we will have time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions throughout, please put them in the chat and we'll be sure to address them at the end. Thank you so much. So over to Nyana.
And to do this, I will have to unmute. So hello, everybody, and welcome. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this webinar. My name's Nyana Flynn, and I was a caregiver for my husband, Renee Flynn, who passed November 2022. And he was only 61. In his last 3 years of life, I coordinated much of his care, and I was his full-time caregiver in the last 6 months. Let me tell you a bit about my husband. Renee was a studio engineer, a songwriter, and an amazing musician. In fact, he toured in a rock and roll band all through the late 70s, playing small towns across Newfoundland, including his hometown of St. John's. Renee was born with a heart condition called Wolff Parkinson White, which led to the gradual weakening of his heart over time. In his late 20s, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes by going suddenly blind on a job site, and that it was incredibly scary. He did regain his sight, but I can't imagine what that did to him as he was going through that. His heart condition combined with the diabetes meant he spent a lot of time in hospitals, seeing doctors in his 30s and 40s. As he approached 3 decades of struggling with his diabetes, the complications started to become more pronounced. It included vision loss, neuropathy, a diabetic ulcer, which became a bone infection, which led to the partial amputation of his left foot. But the complication that led to his death and ultimately was the kidneys, a very steady, gradual loss of kidney function until eventually his kidneys failed. His medical care included regular visits to his family doctor, multiple specialists, including a nephrologist, cardiologist, endocrinologist, ophthalmologist, orthopedic surgeon, an infectious disease specialist, and eventually a palliative care physician. I probably missed some. In his last year, add 3 times weekly visits to a wound care clinic, which eventually transferred to a home nurse visits as he lost mobility. And in the last 6 months of his illness, we were very, very lucky to be referred to a family doctor with a specialty in palliative care through the McMaster Family Clinic, who made house calls. This is not the norm. We were very lucky. These doctors are very rare. In Renee's final months, he chose to receive his care at home as opposed to a hospital or in hospice. He chose to die at home. He adamantly did not want to end his life in a hospital. We were assigned a palliative care nurse in his last 2 months who took over all home visits. Um, and that was when he could no longer walk. Uh, and at that point, he was confined to a hospital bed. He was also assigned PSW visits at that time. But the bulk of his day-to-day care and all the coordination was left to me. I believe that helping my husband negotiate his very diverse needs within the current healthcare system gives me a unique perspective to speak on basically the good, the bad, and the ugly side of end of life care. And there he is. And you can see by the slides, there was, he really did, it's a process. And you do the best you can, I guess. So it does give me a unique perspective to speak on, as I said, basically the good, the bad, and the ugly side of end of life care. It enables me to shed light on the challenges and where I saw holes as I acted on behalf of my husband. So let's start with the good. And there was lots of that. Caring doctors, many who went above and beyond for him. There were many reassuring nurses who were careful to introduce themselves and take the time to establish trust before performing their duties. And I'd like to bring attention to the often forgotten sympathetic receptionists responsible to make appointments who put us on lists to get us seen earlier or squeezed us in last minute as Renee's health deteriorated. One student doctor accompanying the palliative care doctor on a home visit suggested creating an Excel sheet to track all Renee's medications, including what was tried, duration taken, if they worked, and if not, why. And this saved loads of time in every doctor's office and made sure that we didn't repeat medications and allowed us to focus on current health concerns. And this is something our system does not do well a whole, so to speak. So we're on to the bad. Each specialist needs to keep their own list of what they've prescribed, but on every visit, it needs to be updated on what other doctors, other specialists have prescribed. If we were relying on memory, it would be so easy to make a mistake. And while we've slipped into the bad, a big concern for both of us was that specialists, and we saw a lot of specialists, they only focus on their specialty. The surgeon only focused on wanting to do surgery. The infectious disease specialist only wanted to control the infection. The cardiologist only wanted to strengthen his heart. And often medications that work best for the heart weaken the kidneys. Each clinic has their own pharmacy, and the pharmacies don't speak to each other. Nutritional advice contradicted itself. The kidney clinic had one diet, heart clinic another, diabetes clinic another. My husband often said that on doctor's visits he felt like a number, as if he was only the sum of the results of his lab tests, not the person sitting in front of him. I would like to touch on the topic of coordination. After all, there's a system in place. And is this really a problem? The Ontario Health at Home is a provincial organization that now coordinates home and community care, long-term placement, and other community services. And they will put you in touch with service providers, which is good. And that's where it ends. So once a service has been provided, whether it's home nursing, PSW support, physiotherapy services, installations of mobility bars or railings, all coordination transfers to the patient or the caregiver. As multiple services are added up, this becomes a huge task. Thus, my move to full-time caregiving in his last months. That's all good if you have a caregiver to do the job, but what if you don't? Another concern was the lack of continuity of visiting nurses or PSWs. It's very rare to get the same person twice in a row, meaning these strangers entering our home never got a chance to know Renee. And there's so much about a patient that can't fit into a file. The lack of continuity feels disconcerting, and it makes it hard to connect at a time when connection is so important. And on to the ugly. Huge wait times to see needed specialists, with the default being to go to the nearest emergency room. In his last year, Renee didn't have the strength to sit for the very long wait times. And with a lack of seating, I often had to stand. Being exposed to so many sick, coughing people was not ideal for either of us. And we often gave up and went home, hoping the next scheduled home nurse would be able to help with the latest problem. And even then, we were normally told we had to go to emergency. And that's where those wonderful receptionists come in, who somehow always seem to find a way to fit him in, and the kind doctors who worked lunch hours and stayed late to accommodate him. And that's a nice reminder of the good. So Renee's biggest health challenge was his failing kidneys. As such, it was his nephrologist that we saw the most. She personally phoned after Renee's passing to offer her condolences. And during our conversation, she asked if I would be interested to interview, to be a part of a patient and family member advisory council, working with a team of researchers interested in learning more about continuity at end of life in our current system. And the idea would be for me to add my input based on lived experience of what matters most to patients and family during that time. Um, I agreed, and here I still am, a few projects later. If my contribution helps in any way to make the process easier for others negotiating end of life, it's a worthy investment of my time and effort. And I thank the team for making me feel valued and heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanna, for sharing your story and helping to set the context for the work that we do. I know it's always challenging to go into those details and revisit those moments, and we really value you opening up to an audience of some strangers. And thank you. So we wanted to open with that so you understand the content area, the sector that our research is situated within. We focus on healthcare, we focus on end of life and palliative care. And a lot of the work we do is around movement across the health system or health services research. With that context, though, we go into the arts-based knowledge translation. So what we do in our lab is we leverage this methodology that we've adapted from existing approaches to the context of end-of-life care. And so getting into why we have chosen to focus on using arts-based knowledge translation. So going to the title of this presentation, From Paywalls to Community Halls, historically, lots of health services research is published in medical journals, many of which used to be behind paywalls. And now for the small fee of $5,000 US, you can pay to have your article open access. And so really it is a hindrance to allowing individuals from outside of the medical profession or outside of academia to learn about the research. And oftentimes the way research is communicated in journal articles is not accessible to individuals who aren't in that particular niche. So by communicating our research through art and design, we're able to extend our reach. And as I'm sure many of you felt in listening to Diana's story, there's so much that is relatable when thinking about end of life and death and dying. There's the famous saying, the only thing certain in life is death and taxes. And that's really a motivation for this type of work because really we can find ways to build connection with many, many people through extending our reach. It also, riffing off that, the notion of improving accessibility and taking language that, as I said before, is very niche and making it relatable and understandable to individuals who might not be in the health sector. Also, with the installations and artworks that we've worked on, there's a notion of stimulating the senses, evoking emotions, and another key motivation of our work is to support clinical practice change and policy-related advocacy. And so we're not going to focus so much on that last point today, but that is an element of what we do, and I'm happy to chat about that in the questions. So this leads us to our research to public to research feedback loop, which this work began in 2019. I was doing health services research in Toronto and got connected to a woman named Maria Chung, who had started a arts-based NGO called Taboo Health. And she was helping to organize a conference or an exhibit as part of the Design TO Festival in Toronto around death and dying. And so I was, you know, connected to her through a mutual connection. And I didn't really know what I wanted from the conversation. I just knew I was interested in talking to her. And in the course of the conversation, she said, well, is there something we can collaborate on? And we kind of came up with the idea of her helping me to find designers who could translate some of my research into an exhibit for this particular exhibit in Toronto. And from there, I got connected to Karen O'Coinan and Kate Wilkes, who are fantastic design researchers, innovation designers, who we worked together to develop a particular installation called Going Home to Die, but also to refine this feedback loop. And this process wouldn't have been possible without serendipity, embracing the uncertainty of not knowing where things are going to go and kind of allowing things to unfold, recognizing needs to pivot, and also iterating our ideas. So the first version of the feedback loop, which we kind of distilled in 2020 after our first exhibit, um, is this process, which those of you in the design world, these are not necessarily de novo concepts, but the formulation of these is relatively original. And so, you know, starting with framing the possibilities, talking about our research, how can we consider what could be distilled into something visual, auditory, sensory, understanding that research. Then, before even starting to ideate and design, we think about what are the core design principles for that particular installation and the venues that we've secured. Then we go into ideating, developing the concept. And from there, we work on different types of prototypes, you know, low fidelity and then eventually high fidelity, and then further refine with lots of meetings and feedback. We were doing a lot of this work before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and we continued to do some iterations over Zoom, and we're learning new ways to engage, and rather than, you know, markers and sticky notes and stickers and photos and the type of tactile things that usually were engaged in the design process. And then after we refined and kind of finalized our installation, we exhibited it, and in the process of exhibiting it, we were generating a lot of really interesting participatory contributions from attendees. And at the opening night, I said to Karen, like, it would be really interesting to analyze the inputs that we're getting. And so I suggested, well, you know, we were getting wish worry cards, people writing what they wished or worried about going home to die. And so I suggested myself and my research coordinator could analyze it using qualitative methods. And Karen and Kate suggested they analyze it using methods in the design world. And so we did that and then came together. And this started that synthesis process and looking forward. A few years passed, different priorities came up. And then we were able to secure more funding to further our methodology and also further the various collaborations we had in installations. So this is the current state of our feedback loop. I should mention the one on the previous page is in a publication in Design for Health, and happy to circulate that if that's of interest. This iteration is currently undergoing revisions and under review at a journal, so hopefully we'll be able to share that shortly. But the steps in this process, you'll see a lot of familiarity, but the new things are the iteration and data synthesis and analysis process. So in the first version of the feedback loop, we really went from what is the research? How can we make it into an installation? And then as an afterthought, we did a little bit of an analysis to inform future research. Here from the outset, it was really intentional that we were going to go research, installation, collect data from the participatory elements of that installation to then inform more research. And so what we're going to do now is my colleagues are going to walk you through two exemplars of the way we've used this methodology. And then we'll go back to Nyana to share about how she's been engaged in these projects. So over to Kyle.
Thank you, Serena. It is my pleasure to present the first of our exemplars, the Storytelling Project. Next slide, please. This project was made possible by the Briere Academic Medical Organization Incentive Fund in collaboration with Radical Connections, which is a non-for-profit organization that partners artists with healthcare settings. And the artists that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, Rachel Gray and Kim Kilpatrick, who we collaborated with, also received funding from Canada Council for the Arts. Next slide, please. So in our research to public to research model, an initial feasibility study led to a series of arts-based outputs, including film and prints and performance. And we are now collecting survey data to gauge the impact of the stories and the art on audiences. Next slide, please. So the storytelling project, as I said, started out as a proof of concept study to evaluate the appropriateness, acceptability, and feasibility of storytelling as an intervention on the subacute palliative care unit at Briere Health. Through Radical Connections, we partnered with Kim Kilpatrick, who is a professional storyteller and overall wonderful human person, with previous experience with music therapy and palliative care settings. And she's pictured in the middle here of this photo with her guide dog and arguably star of the show, Ginger. Kim, in this project, co-created stories with patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals and support staff on the palliative care unit at Briere Health. She likened the experience later to of being on the unit to being a wandering minstrel, making herself available to people who are interested and able to craft a story with her. Participants were invited to work with Kim to craft a story about anything that they wanted. Participants had the option to write the stories themselves, audio record a story to be transcribed later, or have Kim draft a story on their behalf based upon a conversation. And the vast majority, all except one, opted to have Kim draft a story for them. So Kim attempted to turn stories around to people as quickly as possible within a couple of days, for patients and caregivers in particular, given limited prognoses. Kim presented her draft to the participants for revision and approval, made any requested edits, and returned final versions for participants to keep. And everyone received their stories except one patient who died before Kim could return it. So Kim gave it to her family instead. The intervention, and this is sort of the dry research part of this, the intervention was overwhelmingly positively received. Participants found the intervention appropriate, accessible, and feasible, as well as meaningful, emotionally resonant, and they would recommend storytelling as an intervention to other people. And sort of interestingly, as an analysis of the stories revealed themes around illness as a journey, the palliative care unit as a site of deep reflection, and palliative care professionals uniquely described pride in and gratitude for their work in palliative care. Next slide, please. The research team found the stories so powerful that we secured a second grant to hire an artist to translate and transform the stories into art. So our project team, made of health services researchers, clinicians, and artists, interviewed applicants according to their previous experience working with palliative and vulnerable populations, as well as an openness to artistic collaboration with Kim, adaptability to developing needs of the project, and also a willingness to work without direct access to the patients, caregivers, and healthcare providers that created the stories. And also, it was important that the artists have an emotional and thematic alignment with the stories. And also, very importantly, given that Kim is blind and her blindness informed her experience working with participants, it was critical that the selected artist be open and able to work in a disability lens. So from that, we hired visual and media artist Rachel Gray, who opted to create a stop motion animated film using oil paint on glass, which we'll show a clip of a little bit later, which involves painting over a single image over and over again, where the brushstrokes from the previous images leave visual echoes from what came before. Kim and Rachel also collaborated to produce described video for people who are blind or visually impaired. And this continues to be an iterative interpretive process between the storyteller and the artist, where the artist interprets imagery from the stories, then develops images, and then describes the images to the storyteller to collectively determine how best to explain the animation. And sort of importantly, the image descriptions are not just intended as an accessibility service or device rather, but as another voice merging with the narrative to advance the story. And as Rachel continues animating, Kim is also in the midst of preparing a live performance that incorporates the stories into her own experience and weaves it all with folktales. So Kim and Rachel have already presented the film, the prints, and described their process at several events, including at academic conferences and at a vernissage at the Ottawa Art Gallery. And they have a scheduled event at the Carleton University Art Gallery in 2026. And I'm very happy to say that as of like a week or two ago, they've secured a Canada Council for the Arts public outreach grant to bring the show on the road in 2026 and 2027. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. And I hope that we can share with you an early iteration of the film that Rachel and Kim collaborated on based on a patient story called Rabbit Hole. So I mentioned at the top that we are now collecting data for an audience impact survey as part of our feedback loop. So if you would like to complete the survey after you view the film, it might take longer and it might be disruptive to complete it as other presenters are talking. But I will post the link to the survey in the chat if you'd like to complete it at some point after you view it. So Serena, go ahead. Fingers crossed this works.
Hello, my name is Kim Kilpatrick. I will be the voice you hear, narrating the stories that I collected from staff, caregivers, and patients on the palliative care unit at Briere. I was honored to be the storyteller who collected and helped to shape these beautiful words into stories for our film. This is one of those stories.
My name is Rachel. I made the visuals for this film, and I'll be providing the audio descriptions. When you hear my voice, it's because I'm describing an image.
From her room on the palliative care unit, she is contemplating big questions.
A woman sits up in bed and looks out the window. A pink light slowly moves into the room and envelops her.
Now, as she explores these deep questions, it feels like she is traveling along a road with many rabbit holes.
Now she is walking on a smooth, straight road in a desert landscape. Beside the road are rabbit holes, large enough for her to fit through. Above her is a yellow sky with an enormous moon.
You can pop down into a rabbit hole.
She dives into a hole and disappears.
Sometimes it is scary, or somewhere you don't want to be.
She swims, leaving an opening behind. She climbs out into the light, her hands in the grass.
Sometimes she ponders and thinks about the vastness of the universe, and it is too much.
She raises her hand and a colorful landscape emerges from her palm. She sinks into the oversaturated surface.
So, she pulls herself back into her small corner of the universe, which is comfortable and safe.
A blue chair floats in the universe. She backs into it and curls up. Raising her head, she looks into the distance.
She also thinks about death.
In a strong wind, the word death appears, then vanishes.
When all of this becomes too much and her brain is too full of thoughts, she climbs down the rabbit hole of mindless Netflix for a while.
Her hands cover her face. She uncovers one eye to peek out. Her body changes. We see her looking carefully into a green rabbit hole, the wind in her hair and blue sky behind her. The Netflix N appears at the bottom of the hole.
After this break, she is able to continue her exploration.
She is floating in the ocean under a pink sky. Two clouds cross the sky. Where they meet, a hole appears. The sky becomes a bird and flies away, leaving only the universe.
Apologies, I'm trying to advance the slide. I might have to, let me stop sharing and reshare. Okay. And a reminder again, as Kyle said, if you don't, oh my goodness, if you don't mind to share or complete the survey, which is right here. Back to you.
Yes. So thank you, Serena. So as Serena mentioned, so our survey is designed to measure the impact of artistic outputs according to arts-based knowledge translation metrics that Serena talked about at the top. And we're making the survey available anywhere the film, prints, performances, presentations, or panels, or workshops. Who knows what else is going to happen with this wonderful grant that they secured. It's just, and yeah, so we're very excited that with this grant, Kim and Rachel will be able to travel and gauge audience impact across Canada from here. Next slide, I'm done.
Over to Rebecca.
Great, thank you so much. So today I'm going to be sharing an arts-based knowledge translation project that asks a universal but difficult question: what makes a good death? We explored this through research and competition and community engagement to make end-of-life care conversations more visible and accessible. Gratefully acknowledge the Canadian Institutes of Health Research for supporting this work through a planning and dissemination grant, as well as our project team of researchers, caregiver collaborators, clinicians, art curators, and artist contributors from across the country. So some context. Death is inevitable and universal. It is also deeply personal and often hard to talk about. Even though many people value the idea of a good death, reality often falls short. Research shows consistent themes in what matters most at life's end: dignity, emotional support, the ability to make choices, and control over where one dies. But in practice, these ideals are frequently unmet. Our lab's work on continuity of care alongside broader studies reveals a troubling disconnect. Too often, patients and families face a system that feels fragmented, impersonal, and overwhelming. This gap between expectation and experience is worsened by inequities in care. There's an urgent need to rethink not only how we deliver care, but how we communicate and engage with the topic of death itself. However, research findings often fail to reach the populations they are meant to serve. This project is rooted in the need to make that knowledge more visible and more accessible. Arts-based knowledge translation, a research mobilization strategy that uses creative mediums with the aim to communicate complex, often difficult topics like death and dying, allows us to reach audiences who might never pick up an academic paper or attend a medical conference. So in this project, we have two primary aims. First, to share research about what constitutes a good death, not just with academics, but with the public, healthcare providers, patients, and their caregivers who are navigating the journey themselves. And second, to evaluate whether arts-based approaches are effective tools for research dissemination. Can they provoke reflection, build understanding, and influence change? So next, a bit more about the conceptual framework. Communicating research on death and dying is challenging. It's an emotionally loaded topic that many avoid, and traditional dissemination methods like journal articles or conferences rarely reach the people most impacted: patients, caregivers, and the public. That's why arts-based knowledge translation offers a promising path forward. By engaging emotions, senses, and story, arts-based knowledge translation can make complex research more accessible, resonant, and inclusive, while also fostering reflection and dialogue. But while arts-based knowledge translation is growing, there's still limited evidence about its effectiveness in health services research, especially on issues like end-of-life care. So this project seeks to help address this. But this project isn't just about research translation. It's also about research creation. By integrating artistic and academic inquiry, it generates new knowledge through creative practice, critical reflection, and experimentation, rather than treating art as a straightforward illustration of research findings. Artists were invited to reimagine research through their own creative lenses, drawing not only on the research findings, but also on their lived experience, cultural perspectives, and aesthetic choices. The result is a rich, multimodal dialogue between the empirical and the expressive, one that expands how knowledge is produced and shared. So our project is organized into 4 strategic phases: a national art competition, inviting artists to interpret research findings on what makes a good death; a public and healthcare exhibition phase where selected works are shown in galleries, hospices, and public spaces; a formal evaluation phase assessing the impact of this approach; and a dissemination plan to ensure accessibility and legacy. Each phase is designed to bridge the gap between research and public understanding through the emotional power of art. So next slide. The art competition. We launched the competition in the spring of 2025, open to artists across Canada in a range of visual media. Each submission included a digital image of the artwork, the artist's biography, and a statement explaining how the piece responds to the research that we shared in the competition call and their lived experience. In total, we received 103 submissions from artists from across 9 provinces, a total of 173 artworks exploring the theme of a good death. Many artists drew from personal caregiving experiences, and the diversity of voices and styles has added emotional and cultural richness to the collection. A jury of curators, researchers, healthcare providers, and caregivers evaluated the submissions using a blind review process and a standardized rubric focused on creativity in communicating the research, authenticity of lived experience, and overall effectiveness in communicating the research. 3 winners were awarded $1,000 each, and their works will be featured alongside selected runner-up pieces in our exhibits and online gallery. Phase 1 produced 3 core outputs: a curated body of research-informed, community-engaged artworks, artist statements that position each piece both within the research and lived experience, and the creation of new interdisciplinary knowledge by blending academic insight with artistic expression. This is research creation in action, an iterative process that invites both emotional and intellectual engagement with complex ideas. So we're now entering phase 2, public and healthcare-based exhibitions. Our objectives in this phase are twofold: to share research on a good death with diverse audiences, including healthcare providers, patients, caregivers, and the general public, and to evaluate whether arts-based knowledge translation is an effective way to communicate this research and to spark meaningful engagement. This phase makes research visible, tangible, and emotionally resonant in both clinical and community settings. The first exhibition opens at the Ottawa Art Gallery from November 8th, 2025 to January 11, 2026, with a vernissage and launch event on November 24th. From there, the exhibit will tour hospitals, hospices, and public spaces across Canada. We've also developed a digital gallery so that people who can't attend in person can still experience the work and engage with the research in new ways. The touring exhibit will be accompanied by an evaluation survey. So we're on to the next phase, which is evaluate. The evaluation survey will assess whether the exhibits helped increase accessibility to the research, build awareness and engagement, encourage dialogue, and ultimately inspire change in how people think, feel, and talk about end-of-life care. We're using a framework that includes reach metrics such as the number of exhibition attendees and website visits, survey completion rates, as well as usefulness. From survey feedback on engagement with research, relevance, and emotional resonance, as well as change indicators, qualitative comments and examples of inspiration to change service delivery or end-of-life planning sparked by the exhibit. This will help us assess whether arts-based knowledge translation is not just engaging, but effective. And then finally, disseminate. The final phase focuses on sharing what we learn, both about the content of the research and the effectiveness of arts-based knowledge translation. This includes peer-reviewed publications and conference presentations, as well as a digital gallery hosted by the Eisenberg Lab, which features artworks of the winners and runners-up, as well as top-ranking entries by province, artist statements, and summaries of the research. This platform ensures the project's legacy, that it lives beyond the exhibition and remains accessible to the public, educators, and healthcare interest holders. So on to the final slide. At its core, the project is about bridging the gap between what we know and what we do, between evidence and empathy. A good death is not a contradiction, it's a possibility. And by using art to communicate research, we hope to bring that possibility closer for most people.
Thank you, Rebecca. So now we're going to go back to Nyana to share with us a bit about how she was involved in the art competition project, as well as the terminal diner, which will be presented next.
Hi, everyone, again. At the beginning of the presentation, I explained how initially I became involved, and it's been a learning experience to see how much time, thought, and energy goes into each and every one of these projects. Always the research forms the base, and as the project is brought to life, again, so much thought is given to the most effective way to engage the public, to inspire conversation, ultimately enable the team to gather the data that they are after. And I'm learning a lot as I'm watching the slides too of what the team does with the research afterwards. And then there's, even the logistics of setting up an installation, touring it, all the costs involved. And to summarize, putting it together is a huge undertaking. My first art installation project was called the Terminal Diner, which you're going to learn about next. Before any project starts, the research is sent ahead to review along with an overview of the purpose for the installation being developed. And when attending the meetings, I do my best to provide my perspective on a person as a person with lived experience. And I try also to imagine that I am the person from the public seeing the installation for the first time. Would it capture my interest enough that I would take the time to participate? As an artist, I try to imagine if the installation will be visually appealing. Will it invite people in? And in that context, I do hope that any ideas and and I know any ideas and suggestions I share are part of the process. And it's always a very comfortable and collaborative space to be in. With the Good Death art competition, it was my first experience adjudicating art. This is also my first webinar. As a participant, not as a participant, I guess as a presenter, yes. And what I learned is that the vulnerability each artist showed in both their artworks and their stories, when I was adjudicating, it often brought me to tears. It was an incredibly emotional undertaking, and it much more than I expected. And I really hope this will be the experience of people visiting the exhibit as it's exhibited as it goes across Canada. And there's something that I learned about the power of art as I adjudicated and as the winning painting came up because, and I hope I'm not giving too much away, the winning painting didn't resonate with me at first. Not that it wasn't stunningly beautiful. I mean, it certainly is. I just didn't see how it reflected a good death. And luckily, it's a team that adjudicates because as I listened to the other team members describe their reaction to this painting, I began to see it in a different light. My mind was caught up in the trappings and clutter of my own personal experience of what end of life brings, which to me was cabinets full of medical supplies, quiet vigils, hospital beds, walkers against a wall, the comfort of a hand being held, walkers, I didn't see the beauty and simplicity of the image. And even what I found is that through studying this art, that even in the process of dying, there's still life to live, experiences to be enjoyed and shared. And I really hope that everyone participating in this will get a chance to see the exhibit and make that judgment for yourself. So how does this translate to adding my lived experience perspective to projects such as the Terminal Diner and the art competition? All I can say is that unless you have lived it, you can't prepare for the emotional roller coaster you're about to embark on. The frustrations, the level of organization required to coordinate nursing, doctors, medications, and wound care, living in a house that's a revolving door for doctors and medical supplies while still trying to do the regular necessities of and basics of life, such as getting groceries, cooking, laundry, you get the idea. But within the chaos, there's also many moments of humanity and kindness with health professionals on all levels taking the time and consideration to listen, especially to listen to Renee. They did, they did listen to my concerns as a caregiver, and I did find comfort in that. But especially to listening to Renee, to being careful that Renee's pain was controlled, that what he wanted mattered, and that he was heard, because it's so important to be heard. Uh, we are all going to die. It's part of our human experience. And each of us will have to negotiate our own roller coaster, depending on the unique circumstances that frame our moment. And having the best palliative care system possible, one that reflects what people want and care about and supports the many professionals that work within the system, is of the utmost importance. Art speaks to us on an emotional level, so excuse me if I get a little emotional here. Art invites introspective and dialogue. And as an artist myself, I wanted to contribute to this dialogue. If I can bring any kind of meaning to my husband's death and use our experience to help others, I'm in. Through the blood and the grit and the real pain of saying goodbye to a loved one, through my experience of living the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's the part that I wanted to add to the statistics, the data, and the science that these projects are based on. Thank you.
Diana, that was so beautiful. Oh my goodness. I need to find a tissue somewhere in my office. Thank you for sharing that.
I had one ready.
We are so fortunate to have you involved in our work and, so generous with your time and insights. And just thank you again. So, switching gears to practical considerations. I don't know how to make a smooth segue after that. I apologize. So I know we are a little over time. We want to make sure that there is an opportunity to do the interactive element of this presentation and actually have you participate in the Terminal Diner. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through the lessons learned and practical considerations, and I'm very happy to speak to these during the questions. So as I sort of alluded to at the beginning, this was what's the expression, building the airplane while it's in the air type of situation. We didn't know what we were going to end up with. And there was a lot of things we've learned through trial and error. So the first thing is, and Nyana mentioned this, thinking about the logistics of storing and transporting your art or your installation. Um, Ease of assembly and disassembly. Our first installation took 6 hours and 5 people to assemble. And subsequent installations, we've really tried to ensure that they can fit in a regular size SUV and that they can be assembled within an hour. So these are things to think about. Um, Accessibility for public engagement. So one thing that I think is so valuable in our work on the storytelling project is through working with two artists who identify as individuals with disabilities, it really helped us as a team figure out ways to um, accommodate as much as possible individuals from diverse backgrounds and abilities. So, the voiceover for the stories, for example, but other considerations as well are things that we're always thinking about in terms of making sure that as many people as possible can experience the installation. And that speaks to, for the Good Death competition, the decision to have a physical exhibit that is traveling in Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia with hope to expand further, pending further funding, but also to have that online exhibit that will be launched when the Ottawa Art Gallery installation is launched. And in the interim, Rebecca, if you don't mind putting in the chat the link to the exhibit page with some more information that I think has our other venues listed. So the other thing too is start earlier than you think and work proactively towards deadlines. Things always come up with this work. Like, I cannot stress that enough. Some of you in the audience may be yourselves artists or designers with lots of experience doing these physical installations. I was not to this point. I do art outside of work, but I never set up a physical installation 3-dimensional. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of coordination. And so just being prepared for that, and things are going to come up, shipments are going to be delayed, whatnot. Another really important consideration. So the work in our lab, as I think was hopefully clear, is we often will commission or contract artists and designers to help us create the works. And so it's a delicate conversation about copyright and intellectual property when the output both contains our research and the stories of participants, as well as the creative contributions of the artists or designers. And, it's every contract is a little different depending on who we're working with and what we're producing. But it's important to have a contract and do that early. And also be clear in your contracts who's responsible for what. When appropriate, get research ethics approval, especially if you're going to be using the feedback loop where you're collecting data from attendees. And also, for some of our research, we used qualitative interviews that we conducted to inform the outputs of the installation. And so when people were consenting to participate in the interview, we also had them consent to the potential use of their interview data for knowledge translation, arts-based knowledge translation purposes. And that also included a media release. So things to consider depending on your institution and their rules. Also, practical tips. I think Nyana has made it exceptionally clear this work needs to be done with people with lived experience. It is so integral to the integrity and the value of what we produce. These are some examples of funders that have supported some of the work that we're sharing today and some other projects that we're doing. We do have things in the works to also engage in a theater piece, as well as other visual art pieces and installations. Venues, we've been successful through networking and word of mouth. Sometimes even a cold email has resulted in a venue. Really valuable to have someone on your team or someone in your organization support promotion and engagement with media. And also, having a diversity of venues is really valuable. And one thing that we are hoping to do with some of the art competition results is actually analyze the surveys stratified by locations, because we're collecting from galleries and hospitals and hospices and libraries, and it will be really interesting to see the differences in who is in those space and participating and interacting with the installation. So now I'm going to pass it over to Aria to talk about the Terminal Diner. You'll learn a bit more about this really fascinating project. Over to you, Aria.
Thank you, and happy to be here and speak with you all. So, this is a project that was funded by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. Next slide, Serena. So, I'm going to keep it running because I don't want to miss the opportunity to have everyone participate as well. This is a project that is a paradigmatic example of the feedback loop. It's sort of the originator of the research to public to research completion of the loop. And so this was a project that began with that funding to look at continuity of care at end of life, which is an aspect of care when it is experienced as connected and consistent for patients and their medical and personal needs. And so we overarchingly wanted to identify how and what aspects of end-of-life care enhance continuity for patients. And so we started with the research, and this was a population-based cohort study that we conducted, which is a quantitative study looking at patterns and types of continuity for patients in Ontario at the end of life. And specifically, we looked at people who died with chronic kidney disease on dialysis, heart failure, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. And we took those findings to then inform the development of our public phase, which was a participatory design installation, which we selected to really optimize public engagement in the knowledge exchange through collective making with the outputs. They were used to be incorporated in the following research phase, which was the qualitative interviews. And I want to highlight for the participatory design phase, it involved co-design with our design researchers, our health services research team, and caregiver partners, including Niana, as we know. And it was invaluable to have that mix together and to inform our research phase, which I will get into a little bit more later. Next slide, please. So to dive in a little bit more to the process, as Serena and team has mentioned, it's highly iterative and flexible, but I will break down now in hindsight how it played out. And really the goal overall was to, throughout, answer the question of how do we design an installation about death that both shares our findings and elicits engagement from the public in order to be useful and synthesizable for our own research, and do this in the most effective way possible. So next slide. Beginning with the research, as Niana mentioned, the health services researchers on the team presented our quantitative findings. And this provided an opportunity for the design researchers to probe, pose questions, and understand the significance of our quantitative findings and any compelling elements that we wanted to include in the installation. Next slide, please. And moving on to the design phase, we began by developing design principles, which really acted as guardrails for us for the rest of its development, that kept us aligned with what we were trying to achieve, and therefore what design choices we could make to achieve it. And these were developed through conversation about previous design installations, from which we took inspiration and were able to clarify our values as a team moving forward. Next slide, please. And so broadly, we wanted the installation to be accessible. We wanted it to be conceptual and have striking imagery that prompted intrigue from the public. We wanted to aim for reflection, including people's lived experiences if possible. We strove for active participation and prioritized responding tangibly and physically over writing to lower that barrier to participation, and also collect something that is synthesizable for us in the following research phase. Next slide. So coming away from the first quantitative findings and the design principles, the design researchers incorporated both to present some initial conceptual directions, which involved essentially choosing between different ways of engaging. Would it be a ballot in a box, putting a sticker on a continuum, using strings to connect ideas, people, places, things? And then through a cycle of feedback between the design researchers and the rest of our team, we came up with many iterations until it crystallized into an evolved concept. Next slide. The design researchers developed its structural form and interactive materials, which we then prototyped. We provided feedback. We also received feedback from people in our lives who would represent the public to have a little bit of a test run, and then we put it into production. And next slide. So the resulting installation is entitled The Terminal Diner, which borrows the characteristics of your classic diner where you fill out a paper menu with what you would like on your burger. But instead of a burger, we're inviting participants to complete both orders for their own ideal end of life healthcare, or leave reviews of lived experience of a loved one's end of life healthcare. This photo is taken from its first exhibition at Evergreen Brickworks in Toronto, which saw a broad swath of the public, its farmers market goers, DJ skate night attendees. So this was a great place to start. Next slide. And so here we prompted participants to complete either an order or a review anonymously with questions of who would be in charge of the care, where would care be received, and where would the location of death be. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. Next slide. When the form was completed, we invited participants to put it on the receipt holder and tangibly place it there for others to view anonymously. Next. And then we also leveraged this as an opportunity to invite participants who are already interested in engaging with the topic of death by engaging with the exhibit to participate in our subsequent qualitative interviews. And we found that this was the most successful method of recruiting actually for those interviews across Canada. And next, finally, one more back, Serena. We also included reviews that we completed on behalf of the population level data that we had collected in the quantitative phase. And so we completed a review for each of those disease populations I mentioned at the beginning, which I will share later, our findings there. Next. And as we mentioned, it's an iterative process. So we iterated and we then displayed it at McMaster University in its second exhibition site with a few changes, which was based on observation and trying to really most effectively improve people's capacity to engage with the piece. Next. We also have taken it on the road across the country to a selection of venues, again, trying to target those diverse audiences of the public. And next. We've also had some media attention and engagement, which really did strengthen people's attendance to and engagement with the piece. It garnered awareness for the piece, and it also facilitated future venue scouting. Before I move on, wanted to highlight that this concept won out for a few reasons. It had some strengths that we all agreed was the direction we wanted to move in. The humor and cheekiness of the probe as a way to get into the conversation about such a difficult topic. And pairing something familiar like a diner with something outside of ordinary discussion was a way to make this conversation accessible and break the ice. And we saw people having many conversations about it that may not have otherwise when we observed the installation, and hopefully there was some reflection as well that was a similar experience. The second piece that was very convincing for us was that it allowed us to contrast really novel and different pieces of data, from the population level data to individual level data of lived experiences in the reviews, to actual desired experiences that people wished at an individual level as well. And so we had this comparison that was allowed by quantifying data collected using design methods in this new way. Next. So finally, we use those outputs, the reviews and the orders, and triangulating those with the quantitative findings from our first phase, we use them to modify and inform our qualitative interviews, specifically the interview guide. And we'll go to the next slide. Essentially, when we were interviewing caregivers to understand their experiences with continuity of care for the patients who had passed, we asked them the same questions that were on the menu from the terminal diner, asked for their own desired experiences as well, and then we shared our findings from the quant and from the installation and asked for their reflections on it and their lived experience, and any comparisons they had to it. And so this is the terminal diner and the feedback loop in sum. It represented a new paradigm for health services research, and it allowed us to leverage insights from the public and triangulate all of that into further work, where we've now developed a theory of continuity of care at end of life that is been submitted in a manuscript for publication.
Thanks,
Yeah.
So appreciating we only have around 10 minutes left for our interactive component and questions. So I'm going to just quickly breeze through what's remaining and then open the floor to questions, and possibly if people want to do the interactive element, we can talk about it if there's no questions, but I want to make sure we prioritize those. So you are invited to complete your own terminal diner menu, and Sinat, if you could launch the poll right now. Folks can select their main doctor managing their care, the main location to receive care, and the location of death they would prefer. As individuals complete it, we'll move on to the next slide. So here we have the results based on our population level research that shows what reviews were done of individuals with these 3 types of organ failure. And so as you're completing your own terminal diner menu, I encourage you to consider ways in which what you are indicating as your order, as your preference, might be different from what we're observing in the population level in terms of where people are getting care and where they're dying and who they're getting care from. So, we'll have these slides available. We also have this information on our website. And so, Aria, if you don't mind putting in the chat the link to the Terminal Diner page, folks can peruse that at their leisure, and hopefully our manuscript will be out shortly. And so here what we have is just the delta between those orders, so what people aspired towards, and reviews of what they witnessed among their loved ones or friends and family and those individuals' dying experiences. And if we had more time, I would go into the delta between what people desired and the actual experience, and also the delta between this information as well as what we see at a population level. But in the interest of time, we won't go into that. So I just wondered, Sinat, could you close the poll and just share the results briefly? Yeah, so you can see here that interestingly, the main location to receive care was the doctor's office, which certainly a preference if one has the mobility to achieve that. Also, there was a preference for hospice and home care. And for location of death, very interestingly, we see palliative care unit as 33% of individuals indicated that preference. And we know there's not that many palliative care unit beds in the province, so it's not actually viable for a large proportion of the population to die there. And then I do see we have some short answer notes, but unfortunately, we can't see them through this end of Zoom. So we're going to go on now to discussion, and I welcome any thoughts on your experience completing the terminal diner if you had a chance to do the poll, And anything else? I did see in the chat there was a question about our training in death and dying. So I am a PhD researcher. My PhD was in social behavioral sciences, and my dissertation focused on palliative care. So I've been working in the palliative care health services space since 2013. Um, Nyana obviously has lived experience, and Rebecca, Aria, and Kyle have their own versions of lived experience as well as research expertise in this space, having worked in the lab for some time now. But we also importantly do collaborate with practitioners, physicians, nurse practitioners, social workers, chaplains, etc., when we're developing these installations. And so on a lot of those meetings that were alluded to in developing the concepts, we have people who work professionally in that space and do research in that space and have lived experience in that space work together to come up with what we're doing. In terms of other questions, I don't see anything else in the chat. So if anyone wants to, I don't know, unmute and ask a question.
Serena, I'll just jump in. Lots of kudos in the chat about this is really moving important work. And when I think about arts-based research, one of the things that often comes up is how do you balance the art and the science, but also the lived experience? And I was struck, Diana, about, that picture didn't really depict your experience. And so I wonder if you could talk about this, everyone's lived experience is different. You kind of have the science of our space work, you have the arts piece, and how do you juggle all of that as you do this work?
Sorry, just to clarify, juggle within my own various hats or when we have a team with a variety of experience?
I think in terms of what you produce and where you go. So you're trying to do really good art. You're trying to build the science. You're trying to weave in diverse lived experiences. And how do you manage the tensions there, I guess, as an individual, as a team?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So, lots of conversation. And we've said the word iterative many times, and that is really one of the most important parts of our process because there's certain priorities. So, for example, um, what we design is also contingent on where we're exhibiting. And so for the art competition, knowing that we were going to exhibit in really big, well renowned galleries in Canada. So the competition is going to be exhibited on the Ottawa Art Gallery, but also the Art Gallery of Hamilton. And so we wanted to be sure that what we were producing, as well as how we framed the pieces, was of a caliber that you would expect in an art gallery. And so that was a bit of tension we were balancing the considerations of pieces that were moving us and really reflected lived experience with pieces that were, very aesthetically powerful. And then also our priority, based on our funding, was to ensure that the pieces adequately reflected the research that we shared. So it couldn't just be, a depiction of death. It had to be through the artist statement communicated why and how this was relevant to the research. So in short, it's just ongoing communication, and we try to operate in a collective decision-making model where one voice is not superior to another in making decisions, but that does mean building in the time for deliberations. So it is challenging, but it's really going back to one of the earlier slides, just having an openness to that and appreciating that the output that you wrote in your grant might not be the output that you end up with. And that's the beauty of co-creation, the beauty of co-design. Yeah. Anything else from the rest of the team to share on that?
I would add, with regards to the terminal diner specifically, I recall reflecting with the design researchers that Nyana's ideas and support were part of how we got to such an interesting place. with the installation. So they're just underscoring again the importance of having someone with lived experience to advocate, because I don't think would have arrived at that concept without Diana on the team.